We've been getting a significant number of questions, both from press and concerned residents of Santa Fe, and we thought the best way to give everybody information and to be as transparent as possible would be to have a joint statement where we could address the many different questions that have been asked and produce the best information we have as of this time today. This is a continuing investigation and a continuing situation as we try to both address the protest on the plaza that led to the toppling of the obelisk, as well as measures to move forward toward a united collective response to work for a safer and more productive conversation in the community. I think what we'll do as a way of answering the questions is I'll ask the chief to present answers to many of the very specific questions that about events that happened this weekend, including some individuals who appear to have chained themselves to the obelisk and how that situation was resolved, and then going forward to the events yesterday that led to the obelisk coming down. Then I will pick up the narrative and talk about what's been happening over the past few months to address the issue of a community-wide dialogue about history, culture, art, and statues and monuments in Santa Fe and in northern New Mexico, and where we go from here. So with that as a brief introduction, Chief Padilla, let me turn it over to you, and you can talk about the context of yesterday, what we've seen over the summer in the way of protests and demonstrations, what happened earlier over the weekend, and then the events of yesterday, and many of the questions that have been asked regarding the police response.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Once again, everyone, this is Andrew Padilla, Chief of Police with the Santa Fe Police Department. What culminated yesterday is a situation that's wrong all the way around, no matter how you look at it. Many questions are being asked. Was the Santa Fe Police Department prepared? Were we underprepared? As we've dealt with many of the situations over this past summer in and around the plaza at the state capitol, this was going to be a peaceful protest or demonstration. We staffed it with 6 police officers at the plaza itself. Officers were monitoring the situation, and it quickly evolved, and it was a rapidly evolving situation where many of the people that were participating in it, they broke down the pedestrian railing in and around the obelisk itself, and then the events that we are all aware of at this point evolved. Our officers, 2 officers were tackled, pushed, shoved. Those officers defended themselves, and the other officers that they were dealing with the protesters in and around the obelisk itself. And I believe that not all the people that were there demonstrating or protesting had this in their mind, that they were going to destroy or vandalize or pull down the obelisk itself. I believe it was a small group of individuals that knew what was going to go on, and they came prepared with one situation or one plan in mind, and they enacted that plan. Our officers were staffing that event. As I mentioned earlier, the situation rapidly evolved. They called and asked for more officers that were on duty. While they were doing that, those officers were tackled, punched, shoved. Those officers defended themselves. They effected 2 arrests, and then the other officers arrived and assisted them getting those 2 individuals that were arrested and get them out of the area. The supervisors that were on scene, they contacted the on-duty supervisor or commander. That commander made the decision to pull out of the plaza and not to go interact with anyone else unless someone's life was in danger. At this time, it was preservation over life, over property. I stand by that commander's decision, and that is the right decision. If I was a supervisor or commander on scene that same day, in any other situation, we would have made the same decision. Many people have the questions that we should have gone in there and deployed tear gas or shot people with rubber bullets or pepper spray or chemical munitions or tear gas. At that point, we would have interrupted the lives of many onlookers or tourists who were just walking by the plaza themselves, wondering what was going on. At that point, like I said, we made the decision to stand down and allow the individuals that had it in their mind to pull down the obelisk, and they did so. After the obelisk was pulled down, about 15, 20 minutes later, that's when that crowd paraded around the obelisk, posed for their pictures, and moved on. We've coordinated with the state police and the sheriff's department to, if they receive any tips or information regarding this incident, that they're going to prosecute, share that information with our department as a handling agency so we can prosecute these individuals. So I'm asking if anyone has any information regarding the individuals that are posted on our website, videos that you are seeing on any social media feeds, on the news stations. If you can identify any of these people, please reach out to Anthony Tapia, our captain with the Santa Fe Police Department, at 505-955-5286. Mayor, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. We have a list of questions, Chief, and I think it's worth, I'll play the role of asking them, and the ones that are directed more toward you, I will direct toward you. Some that I can answer, I would be happy to take that on. I think it's worth repeating that we started with 6 officers on the scene, and I believe it's been your approach historically that for peaceful demonstrations, that was an ample number of officers. Maybe you could describe the number of demonstrations and protests we've had over the summer, and that they've included a variety of groups, and they've all been peaceful up to now, and the police were enough for those kinds of demonstrations.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. Over the 10-plus demonstrations or rallies we've had in and around the plaza itself, we've staffed them with 4 to 6 police officers, and that has been enough to include the supervisor that's there monitoring the situation itself. So we felt that was enough information, and based upon the information that we had, that was enough personnel to observe and manage the situation. There's always on-duty personnel that can be called in if things go awry, as they did yesterday, and we're able to use the police radio to call in those extra resources. One question that's being asked is, did we have better intelligence leading up to this, or intel? If we truly had the information, it's out there now that, hey, look, this group was going to come and do this type of incident with the obelisk, would have definitely stepped up the manpower for this situation. Instead of just having the 6 individual officers and the supervisor that's there, is we could have easily doubled those resources. We could have had those emergency response team members there. We could have had the SWAT team members there to deal with all the personnel that were going to be there. And if the situation went the way it would have been, obviously those additional officers would have stepped in and dealt with the situation differently. And we could be talking a different story right now. We could be talking about, why did the Santa Fe Police Department emergency response team or the SWAT team members go in there so heavy-handed and use excessive force? Why did they outnumber the personnel? Or the cries and concerns that we've heard over the many years of, why are there officers or snipers or marksmen on top of the rooftops of the plaza? We would have had those concerns, but we've taken a step back and allowed people to demonstrate and get their voice and concerns out there, as we've done all summer long, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. I think it's all, you mentioned it before, but I want to go back one time. There was a call for backup, and backup did come.
Mr. Mayor, that is correct. When those officers that were on scene were effecting the arrest on those 2 individuals, the crowd continued to mob them. Those officers that were on scene called for additional resources, and from the police video that I've seen today, you easily see that an additional at least 4 to 6 officers arrive on scene and assist them disperse that crowd that's around them so they can remove those 2 individuals from the plaza itself. They get to the outskirts of the plaza. Those on-duty supervisors reach out to the on-duty commander, and that's when the decision's made for them not to re-engage the group at the obelisk.
And the staging area for returning to the plaza was Fire Station 1. Could you talk a little bit about the resources that were gathering there? I think the major, as you've described it to me, the major concern was that it was conceivable, given what had happened in demonstrations elsewhere, that this demonstration could spread to other parts of the downtown area.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. Many of our officers that were on duty, to include our detectives, responded to Fire Station 1. And you're not just going to have the officers wildly rushing to the scene itself. It has to be a coordinated effort. We had to see if this group was going to travel down the different streets of the city of Santa Fe and loot or vandalize any of the business fronts. We had to identify if that's what they were going to do. So we coordinated with the New Mexico State Police and the Sheriff's Department. They provided resources. We had that joint command at Fire Station 1, and we had to determine, okay, what streets in and around the plaza are we going to block for the ingress and egress around the plaza itself. And as I mentioned earlier, once the obelisk was pulled down, about 20 minutes later, that group that did this damage to the obelisk itself, they dissipated and they left the plaza area. So there was no need to send those officers rushing on in. We understand people's concerns that the plaza was left unattended. We had a mobile video trailer at the plaza itself. We had detectives monitoring that live feed. If there was any danger to anyone's life, we would have definitely sent those officers in.
Couple other things that we ought to talk about, Chief, and then I'll take some of the questions that were directed toward me specifically. The flyers that were put out prior to the event really called for a peaceful assembly. I believe that was part of what made your response seem appropriate. Before that, there was a peaceful resolution to individuals who had occupied the obelisk and chained themselves to it, and your negotiating team successfully ended that in a way that the protesters felt they'd been heard, and they left peacefully, and there really wasn't.
After about 10-15 minutes of time that went by, our negotiators made contact with them once again, and they agreed to come down peacefully. They removed their chains, their bike locks. They gathered their camping equipment and supplies from the obelisk itself and in and around the fencing down below. And we allowed them to bring up a pickup truck and load those items into the pickup truck. We offer our assistance along with the fire department to hand carry some of their items. They refused those items to be carried by us, but we allowed them to bring up that pickup truck, as I mentioned. And at that point, they left peacefully. And we were very happy that the officers were very respectful, calm, and collective. And those group of individuals complied. And at that point, we set up guard duty, shall we say, overnight for on-duty officers and overtime officers to monitor that obelisk into the next morning.
So let me quickly turn to a couple of questions that people are asking about what happens now. Chief, some of this is, all of this has to do with law enforcement. Do we know who's responsible for the violence? Are there groups or a group or groups that are, we think, the people who really led the toppling of the obelisk? Two people have been charged. What is the going forward situation with them? And will we be pressing charges? Will the police department be pressing charges against other people going forward? What can we learn from the video?
Mr. Mayor, those are some great questions, but we do ask that everyone's patience comes into play in this investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. The videos that are being posted on social media, if you can please share them with the police department. Like I said, we are the lead agency investigating this crime of vandalism or criminal damage to property. We want anyone to come forward. And as we identify these individuals or groups, at that point, we will let people know that, hey, look, we need you to come and speak to our detectives, or if we have to go the route of obtaining an arrest warrant for this individual or individuals, at that point, we will seek them out and bring them in and arrest them. And if they're willing to speak with us, we will allow them to speak with us.
Thank you, Chief. One other thing that we need to clarify, I had gotten information yesterday from officers on the scene that some items had been thrown at the workers who were on the obelisk. I think that's not the case. The video shows, and you can confirm or elaborate on this, Chief, what the video shows is that the railing and pedestrian area or barriers were not thrown at the city workers, but they were tipped over and ultimately dragged into the inside of the area where the obelisk is. So we need to correct that. Nothing was thrown specifically, but those pedestrian barriers were tipped over and then dragged into that part of the obelisk interior. Is that pretty much what you saw happen?
Yes, Mayor, that's exactly what I saw in the videos that I've seen today.
Okay. Let me take a few questions that came in my direction. What about the idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission? What has been done? What is the timeline going forward? Because I do think there are two different threads here, and there have consistently been two different threads dealing with the events of this summer. The first thread had to do with questions of the law and questions of jurisdiction and authority for statues and monuments in the city. And the second has to do with the opportunity, the need, and clearly the urgent need now for a community-wide dialogue about histories, cultures, art, statues, monuments. So some matters of law. Question has been asked about the authority over the obelisk. What I've been told by the city attorney is, and the reason this issue has been in the city attorney's office for a few months now, and it is a very complex and complicated legal tangle dealing with documents that are 120 years old. Apparently in 1901, the federal government gave this land to the city with the obelisk already on it. The land was donated with the obelisk as part of it. The obelisk was funded by the territory before New Mexico even became a state. According to what I am told, and this will continue to be researched by the city attorney and may ultimately play into how any charges will or will not be filed, the obelisk belongs to the city. However, there is a National Historic Landmark status for the entire plaza. And that level of overlap is part of what's made jurisdictional authority somewhat complicated. The question about moving forward. Over the last few months, what I've been doing is to explore a variety of approaches to how we can have a community-wide dialogue about our histories, our cultures, our statues, and our monuments, recognizing that this is a very important subject to everybody in Santa Fe and northern New Mexico. I've reached out over the months, several months, to leaders in the Hispanic community who are the heads of cultural organizations. I've reached out to people who are the governors of the pueblos, as well as some of the groups that speak for the urban Indians who live in Santa Fe. I've spoken to every member of the governing body. I've spoken to people at the state level, the federal level. I've looked at experiences in other cities where they've created these kinds of task forces, and I've sought the advice of a broad base of people so that what I was hoping would be the case, we would have a very complete proposal to bring to the city government, to the city council, to adopt as a task force to take on these issues. Yesterday's events have obviously changed the timetable and created a even deeper sense of urgency and immediacy, and heightened the choice that we have to make as a community. I have spoken to several members of the governing body today and yesterday about how we can best move ahead. If you watched the emergency meeting that we held last night to give every member of the governing body an opportunity to address the complex set of issues that happened on the plaza yesterday, as well as to provide their input on how we can best move ahead. The governing body has spoken with a very loud and clear voice as a whole that we need to move forward rapidly to address this community-wide need for dialogue. It's clear that people want to be heard. They want their voices heard. They want their perspective heard. They want their family traditions and tribal interests to be represented. And they want the city and the region's history to be amply represented so that we can move toward a greater sense of healing in our community. With that in mind, with the support of the governing body, we are moving toward the introduction of a title for a resolution that'll be on the agenda of the governing body tomorrow night, and it will move through our standing committees. We have 3 standing committees: Finance, Public Works and Public Utilities, and the Quality of Life Committee. Each of those committees will have a chance to craft the resolution as it goes forward. So we begin with a unified voice as a governing body about how to come together to address and heal these deep historical wounds and injuries. It's clear that Santa Fe and northern New Mexico have hundreds of years, more than hundreds of years, of pain and of suffering and of anger visited on each side, on many sides, and also hundreds of years of collaboration, of love, of cooperation, of spiritual intermingling, of family intermingling. And I think the events of yesterday give us the opportunity and call upon us to step up and make a choice for courage and sacrifice, to stop the fighting, and to join in coming up with community-based solutions about the monuments and about our histories and about our cultures that emphasize the shared values that we have rather than the divisions and the anger that historically have been part of the darker side of northern New Mexico. There's plenty of pain on both sides, and it's time, and on all sides. It's not just 2 sides, it's many sides. And I believe that the events of yesterday require us to express our solidarity, to come together rather than to fight more. As the chief said, this has been a summer of protests and demonstrations across the country. As recently as a couple of days ago, there was a protest and a counter-protest in Denver that led to a shooting and a death. In Albuquerque earlier this summer, there was a protest and a counter-protest that led to a shooting and an injury. We have been very fortunate and blessed over this summer to have protests and demonstrations that remained calm and peaceful. The voices of all parties were heard. We had people here representing Cowboys for Trump. We had people here representing militias. We had people here representing Black Lives Matter. We had people here representing Native American interests as well as Hispanic, cultural, and historic groups. Up until yesterday, we managed to keep within the bounds of peaceful demonstration, even including the civil disobedience of people chaining themselves to the obelisk. That was resolved peacefully, and I believe we all felt that there was an opportunity to have a peaceful day yesterday, with Indigenous Peoples Day taking place primarily out at the Downs and a advertised peaceful gathering on the plaza. As far as the next steps, I think the next steps are to move ahead with this task force to look at culture, history, art, remembrances of families and community, and truth that we can all come together around. That's the work that the governing body will be taking on as a collective group to work collaboratively to try to not ignore history, certainly not to erase history, but to face history and to face ourselves to see how we can learn from history so we work together for a healed and a better future for everybody. Let me see if there are any other specific things. The timeline for this work about creating this task force is now. It starts tomorrow night with the introduction of a title for a resolution, and it'll work its way rapidly through the committee process and with a way to formulate and get the work of such task force underway. There are questions about why we haven't answered press inquiries during the course of this day. The answer very simply is we've been doing our best to be as well informed as possible so that the answers we give you are accurate, complete, and transparent. I can tell you I have watched the video that the police have. That video will be given to each member of the governing body so they too can see what happened. It's clear as the chief said, there were people who were present on the plaza expecting themselves as demonstrators and protesters to be taking part in another peaceful protest. It is clear that there was another group that was well prepared and well rehearsed with equipment and material to tear down the obelisk. And we will be working with other law enforcement agencies, with the chief and the police department taking the lead to identify, to the best of our ability, those who violated the law, those who broke the trust that we have, and to explore with the district attorney's office and other agencies remedies, legal remedies, and legal ramifications. We'll continue to do outreach to people in the community with phone calls and conversations to see if we can call upon people to find their better angels after this event yesterday, to look for peace, to look for understanding, to look for respect, and to not let this devolve into a ongoing exchange of anger and negativity where those who feel aggrieved believe it's their part to exact a portion of revenge. An eye for an eye ultimately leads to everybody being blind. And ultimately what we need is more forgiveness and respect, more healing, more courage, and more sacrifice, and less outrage. The country is currently experiencing an excess of outrage, and here in Santa Fe we need to set a different tone and have a large degree of understanding, respect, mutual effort to come together and find real healing as a community. I believe that's what Santa Fe does. I think yesterday the tearing down of the obelisk is not how we act in Santa Fe as we go forward. We take care to express our differences, but not to let them divide us and tear us apart. Let me take a minute and do a quick scan to see if there are items that we've not addressed. This is not the last time, obviously, we'll be talking about this. There'll be more reports as more information becomes available. Let's see, Chief, you might want to speak to whether or not there are other law enforcement agencies that have offered their assistance and where that stands at this moment.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Many other agencies, including the Sheriff's Department, FBI, New Mexico State Police, have offered their assistance. We accepted their assistance, and we will allow them to assist us. If we need help rounding people up as we identify them, we want them to come forward. If someone feels uncomfortable reaching out to Santa Fe Police Department to relay their information or tip, and they have a friend, a family member, a coworker that works with state police, the FBI, the Sheriff's Department, and they want to share that information with them, please share that information with them. They will relay it to us, and we will all work together to prosecute these individuals. But we're thankful, and I'm personally thankful, that our officers are doing okay. No other citizens were injured, and we protected the lives of anyone that were there. And I want to reiterate the point, had there been a threat to someone's life in and around the obelisk or the plaza, officers would have re-engaged. We have to look at this as the monument. Yes, it's historical, but it is an object. And it's unfortunate that these incidents occurred yesterday, but no one's life was endangered and no other injuries were incurred, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. There's a question that was asked. The mayor sent, it's actually a statement. The mayor sent contractors to dismantle, store, and protect the obelisk, but the workers gave up. That's actually not correct. I did not do that, and those were not city workers. At that time, we determined that the effort that had been made was not going to work, and it was not at my direction, but we did learn that it was not going to be able to make the obelisk safe and safeguarded in storage, and as a consequence, that was when we began to try to build protection around the obelisk. What's been stopping the mayor from doing with the obelisk what was done with the Don Diego statue? The Don Diego statue was and is owned by the city and is safeguarded so that it will be able to be safely maintained, and will be part of the discussions going forward about how best to make historical context a part of the conversation as we look at the statues and monuments that are part of our city. The question about authority and ownership and federal or state roles with the obelisk is the reason that the legal issues were being reviewed by the city attorney's office. So we have consistently been moving on two different tracks. One has to do with legal authority, ownership, and the ability of the city to work with other jurisdictions around these monuments and statues, and secondarily, how to best come up with a plan that would meet with the public's approval to get a conversation going community-wide around history, around culture, around statues, monuments, and the whole community. Those continue to be the dialogues that I believe we need, and those are the dialogues we're going to be moving toward as rapidly as we can. The obelisk was collected. The chunks of it that were destroyed and toppled were collected by the city's public works team and stored in safekeeping so that we will have that going forward as a historical record, and it is safe. Those pieces are safe. They are not destroyed, and they will not be destroyed. What else? Let me see what else we can answer, because we do have a lot of questions. I think there's a great interest in mistakes that were made and what we would have done differently. I think that's always a part of any review after an event like that. I think I speak for the city as a whole, for myself, for the police department. I think we all look at yesterday as a very sad day for Santa Fe. I think it's a day that personally makes me very reflective about our community and about how we can rise to be our best selves. I think the police department's response in not engaging and inciting more violence was the correct decision made by the command staff on the scene at the time. That's their job, that's their experience, that's their training, and that's their policy. It is to put human life above property. I said at the time that we safeguarded the statue of Don Diego that there was no statue that's worth one human life. And around the country, we've seen many human lives taken while statues were being protected. It's unfortunate that these are often posed as an either-or choice, that you have to decide which of a series of bad decisions, bad options you have to select from. We wish we had not had violence and destruction on the plaza yesterday. We wish we had had the kind of peaceful demonstrations we've had in the past. Those have been the way Santa Fe demonstrators have conducted themselves. There is always room for peaceful demonstration, and we support and will continue to support the rights of people to have their voices heard. When it verges over into violence and destruction, then we have a different situation, and the police are called upon to make a decision on the ground, in the moment, whether to wade into the crowd and face a response that makes things even worse and leads to charges of excessive force at the risk of the lives of officers, innocent bystanders, and even in addition to the demonstrators who may or may not be engaging in unlawful protest. It is an escalation that our police department has decided as a matter of policy not to engage in, and to use videos and the ability to identify people from those videos, so that if there are charges to be made in the aftermath of a violent demonstration or a demonstration turning violent, those charges can be made after the fact rather than having to deal with physical harm or potentially serious injury. I think that continues to be the critical issue, and I think, as Chief Padilla said, the police department and its chain of command structure made the call on the ground, going through their proper channels, that there was reason to disengage and return later with more reinforcements, more support from state, county, other resources. If you look at the video, you will see that the police and other law enforcement agency personnel do return to the plaza, do secure the plaza, do make sure that there are no further injuries, and act in a way that is most in the interests of public safety for the city as a whole. Chief, do you have any other elements you want to add in terms of the response of the police, the planning for the peaceful gathering that turned not peaceful, and the where we go from here with police department continuing to do outreach and frankly to calm the community the best of our ability?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I do encourage everyone and anyone to come forward with any information regarding yesterday's incident. And moving forward, obviously, we encourage people to come and speak to officers either in person, over the phone, via Zoom, whatever technology we're using nowadays. It's easy now to simply say, hey, the police department should have known better. We should have had more information. But we also need your help. Not only do we have the capability to see what's out there in open social media sources, but we also see, hey, any groups that you are in with, or friends or family members, or any individuals that might know about information of a small group of individuals or large groups that might be planning any future violence or destruction of any property, to please come forward. You can always remain anonymous, and we won't divulge that information, but it's safety all the way across the board, and we can hopefully prevent any further damage. We are always going to be looking to figure out who to blame. Do we blame this person or that person? I'm personally thankful, as I mentioned earlier, that none of our officers were harmed any further. No other citizens, onlookers, or tourists walking the plaza or children were hurt or damaged. We didn't go in there heavy-handed. We didn't go in there with a large array of weapons or less lethal weapons, or deploy tear gas and disrupt the business of the local shops that are there. People enjoying dinner or lunch out on the open dining areas of the Plaza Cafe or anyone else down there. We didn't disrupt the whole livelihood, and many people went about their days after the fact. But we encourage you to come forward with any information on this incident and any incidents moving forward, but we're always here to work with the community.
And I would conclude simply by saying I would call on people of goodwill from all sides to stop the fighting now, stop the bickering, stop the back and forth of who suffered more injuries over history, who had more pain inflicted upon them. Frankly, there's more than enough pain for everyone. There were atrocities on all sides. There were slavery on all sides. There were history pages written with deep wounds. And at the same time, there are pages of history written with love and compassion and reconciliation. There are pages written of intermarriage and interfaith intermingling. That's what we need to return to, is that sense of community. And we need to stop the fighting now and find a better way to work together. There is plenty of ways that people can express their mutual respect and their mutual love and their mutual compassion as we try to move past yesterday's events, not ignoring them and not turning a blind eye to them, letting the law move forward as it will, and letting the process of community dialogue move forward as it must. So please join me, join the governing body, join all who have a sense of community engagement and respect so that we can move forward with a sense of healing, a sense of respect, sense of shared values, the things that really unite us and make Santa Fe the really blessed and one-of-a-kind city that we are. We have the opportunity to heal these wounds. We have the opportunity to lead a community dialogue that moves beyond acts of violence in the past of the 1600s or of the past from yesterday. So please step up. Let's come together. Let's join hands. Let's find our way forward with respect, with shared values, and with reconciliation. Thank you.